DevilNeverCry.
What is up everyone, it is me DevilNeverCry, and if you're watching this video, you likely already know the big news about Devil May Cry. The series director, Hideaki Itsuno, has decided to step away from Capcom entirely for new ventures. So in this video I quickly wanted to talk about some of the speculation going on behind the scenes and just provide my own personal take as to what exactly is going on and perhaps, maybe, what we can expect to see next. Going back to Itsuno's announcement for a second, he did mention that from as soon as September he'll actually be working on a new title, but what exactly it's going to be or where it's going to be, we won't know until we know with an announcement, so to speak. Some people have suggested that he's been poached from Capcom by bigger companies like Tencent or even NetEase, but again, we won't know until we know. It has been a long, fruitful tenure at Capcom for Itsuno-san, I'll say that much. He mentioned it's been 30 years and 5 months in particular, with him having worked on games like Rival Schools, Power Stone, Capcom vs SNK, to even other titles like JoJo's Bizarre Adventures and Auto Modelista. So suffice it to say, he definitely worked on some bangers before he got his hands on the DMC series. He did also add a nice touch in his farewell note, stating that we should continue to support Capcom and their games and their characters too. Though overall, this message has gone down about as well as you'd expect on the internet. On the one side, we've got people who are grateful for everything that Itsuno-san has done for the series and are excited about what it is that he's cooking up next. And on the other side, you've got people who are certain that this spells sudden death and just absolute doom for the Devil May Cry series as a whole. And others like myself, I guess, fall somewhere right in the middle. Itsuno-san is not the first person who's worked on DMC5 to actually leave Capcom. You've got others that spring to mind, like Ryota Suzuki, one of the designers who left to work at Square Enix actually and worked as the combat designer for Final Fantasy XVI. Alongside that, we also had one of the other designers, Ryosuke Yoshida, also leave too. Having said that, there are still several important staff members who worked on DMC5 that are still at Capcom. So I like to think that if Capcom truly wanted to continue the series, that they definitely could. Some of the online speculation suggests that it might have been Dragon's Dogma 2 that pushed Itsuno-san out of the company, which I don't necessarily think is the case. It actually outpaced Devil May Cry 5 in terms of its sales in the first few months, and I believe there's articles stating that the game sold so well that they ended up paying their shareholders more than they expected, as the game had done above expectations. I'd like to think that after a long stint at Capcom, he decided to just leave gracefully. And I think the writing was somewhat on the wall, albeit it's writing you wouldn't necessarily see until you saw this announcement, which I certainly didn't. But if you look back at some of the other interviews that Itsuno-san has done, even some of them going before DMC5, he did mention that DMC5 and Dragon's Dogma 2 were titles that he absolutely wanted to make, somewhat dream titles so to speak. And I guess with those done and dusted and put to bed, he finally felt that he could potentially leave. Whatever it was, the opportunity must have been one that he definitely couldn't have passed up on. Thinking about what comes next for the Devil May Cry series, I'd like to imagine that they will be cooking up a new Devil May Cry title. DMC5 was the fastest selling and best selling Devil May Cry title to date. If you look at some of the surveys too, Devil May Cry as a whole for the entire series actually ranked quite highly too, which indicates to Capcom that there certainly is fan demand for something new. Coincide that also with the fact that you've got the Netflix show coming out hopefully soon, fingers crossed, which could definitely provide much more exposure for the series to a wider audience. I'd like to imagine that Capcom would perhaps capitalize on that opportunity by announcing or potentially releasing a new title or entry in the series. As to what exactly that title or that game is going to be, I'd potentially assume that it's going to be some form of a remake, only because whoever steps into the role of director is going to have big shoes to fill. And so if they throw them in with a remake, they're going to have some form of a template to go off of, it of course being the original game, as opposed to throwing them in the deep end with a new title completely where they're going to have to build things from scratch. It might be perhaps a rather daunting task for somebody who's not dealt with the Devil May Cry license at all. If we potentially speculate as to who might step into that role, Yusuke Hashimoto's name begins to crop up quite a bit. They are, I believe, the director of Bayonetta 2, who currently are working at Capcom, I believe on Street Fighter 6's World Tour mode, but they have worked on other absolute bangers like God Hand, alongside even having credits on the original Devil May Cry. Though he wasn't necessarily in the driver's seat for those projects, being a character designer for God Hand and a VFX artist, I believe, for the original Devil May Cry. Moving on to what exactly Itsuno-san's making next, I think it's going to be hard to pinpoint at this moment in time. He's worked on such a breadth of different games and genres that it could be absolutely anything. Regardless though of whether or not it is a character action or spectacle fighter, hack and slash, whatever you want to call it, I think most people will agree that they wish him the best and that I probably will end up checking out whatever it is just purely off the fact that I've enjoyed so many of his games. And I guess considering the worst potential outcome from this decision is the fact that this might very well be the final nail in the coffin for Devil May Cry. DMC5 might genuinely be the last game that we get in the series, and I suppose it is somewhat of a high note to end it on. Narratively, DMC5 wrapped up the story of the Sons of Sparta. Sure, there are one or two loose ends that you could potentially unravel and unwind into an entirely new story in and of itself, but for the most part, it could stand as a fitting conclusion. Much more so than if DMC4 had been the end, where Nero ponders on whether or not we'll ever see Dante again. And as previously mentioned, DMC5 certainly captured the zeitgeist in a way that DMC4 hadn't, and that much is evident in the insane brain rot memes that you see everywhere, alongside the game's financial numbers. But in the interest of not talking about this topic infinitely, I think I'll leave the video there. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, whether or not it's speculation or perhaps some piece of information that I might have missed. And of course, if you want to stay up to date with anything and everything Devil May Cry, then definitely subscribe. Well, that's said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.